Seven cousins gathered by the edge of a North Carolina lake in the summer of 1997, expecting nothing more than laughter, stories, and the warmth of family. They were young, bound by blood, and caught in the innocence of a night that seemed endless. The water shimmered under the moonlight, boats rocked gently against the dock, and voices echoed across the still surface. But by the next morning, that same lake offered only silence. Clothes and belongings remained scattered where they had been left. The cousins' shoes lined neatly on the dock, but every trace of their bodies had vanished. The lake became the center of fear, speculation, and legend. Families searched in desperation. Neighbors whispered about what could have happened, and investigators struggled with a puzzle that seemed designed to resist answers. Drowning was suggested, but no bodies surfaced. Runaway theories collapsed. Nothing in their lives pointed to flight. Something darker loomed. Something that turned an ordinary summer gathering into one of the state's most haunting mysteries. Witnesses recalled faint cries. Others swore they saw strange lights flickering above the water, and old folklore resurfaced. Stories of lakes that took what they wanted, of places cursed to hold secrets. Each rumor added fuel to a fire already consuming the families left behind. For 25 years, the mystery of the missing cousins remained sealed beneath the waters of that North Carolina lake. But when the FBI returned decades later, they uncovered evidence that would finally break the silence. And the discovery was more chilling than anyone imagined. If mysteries like this captivate you, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. This is Untold Secrets Daily, where the past refuses to stay hidden. The North Carolina lake was a place of beauty, framed by rolling hills and thick forests that leaned toward the water like guardians from another age. In the summer of 1997, its surface shimmered beneath golden sunlight during the day and transformed into a mirror of silver under the moonlight. For decades, families had come here to camp, fish, and let children run barefoot across grassy banks. On that June weekend, the lake welcomed seven cousins whose bond stretched beyond ordinary kinship. They were more like siblings, inseparable, protective of one another, and eager to make every moment count. The cousins ranged from teenagers to early 20s, each carrying a different piece of family history. Some were dreamers with plans for college, others workers already hardened by responsibility. But together, around campfires and along the wooden docks, they returned to childhood simplicity. Their laughter carried across the lake, mixed with the crackle of firewood and the strumming of an old guitar. Polaroids captured them in mid-joke, eyes sparkling, arms draped over shoulders as though nothing could shake them. The campsite was set with care. Tents pitched near the trees, picnic tables loaded with soda bottles and potato chips, coolers filled with ice. A small motorboat bobbed against its rope, while a canoe waited nearby, its oars resting neatly across the seats. To an outsider, the scene could have been a postcard for summer freedom, untouched by the weight of the outside world. Neighbors around the lake would later remember hearing echoes of their celebration. Singing, shouts of playful dares, and the occasional splash as someone dared to jump into the dark water. To those who passed by, it sounded like joy, unbroken and eternal. None suspected that it would be the last night the cousins' voices would ever be heard together. Yet even in moments of joy, the lake had a presence. The water was calm but heavy, deep in places no diver had ever measured fully. Locals told stories of whirlpools that formed without warning, of sudden cold currents that pulled swimmers down, and of shadows that moved beneath the surface like living things. To the cousins, these were stories for children, the kind told around fires to provoke laughter and fear in equal measure. But to older residents, they were warnings passed down across generations. That night, as the cousins laughed on the dock, a thin mist began to rise from the water. It curled around their ankles, clung to their tents, and softened the glow of their lanterns. Photographs would later show smiles frozen in time, unaware of the silence waiting on the other side of midnight. In those images, everything appeared perfect: youth, family, and the illusion of safety. The lake, however, kept its own secrets. The cousins' final evening unfolded with the kind of carefree rhythm that only summer nights can bring. After a day of swimming and boating, they gathered by the bonfire, roasting marshmallows, trading stories, and teasing each other like they had done since childhood. The guitar strummed again. Voices rose in familiar songs, and their laughter carried across the still water. Neighbors on the far side of the lake would later say they heard the echoes well past midnight, drifting like distant fireworks, bright but fleeting. Around 2 in the morning, the fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers and the occasional crackle of wood. A few cousins stretched out on blankets beneath the stars, pointing at constellations and making wishes. Others wandered back toward the tents, yawning with the weight of exhaustion. The motorboat rocked softly at the dock, its rope creaking against the post, while the canoe sat in silence, half shrouded by mist rolling in from the water. To any observer, it was the peaceful end of a perfect day. But when the sun rose, the scene told a very different story. The campsite was eerily quiet. Plates from the night before still lay on the picnic table, soda bottles half full, a guitar leaning against a chair as though someone would return any moment to play it. The tents were zipped closed, but inside, sleeping bags were empty. Shoes lined neatly along the dock remained untouched. The motorboat was still tied, its keys in the ignition, while the canoe drifted a short distance out, bumping gently against reeds. What was missing were the 7 cousins themselves. No laughter, no footsteps, no voices calling out across the water. It was as though they had simply dissolved into the night. Families arriving later in the morning were struck by the unnatural stillness. Mothers called their children's names, their voices breaking against the quiet. Fathers searched the tents in disbelief, lifting blankets and tossing aside pillows as if the cousins might be hiding in some careless prank. But the truth was undeniable. They were gone. Panic spread quickly. The shallow waters near the shore were scanned for signs of drowning, but no clothes were wet, no footprints trailed into the lake. Radios crackled as calls went out to authorities. By noon, deputies and rangers had arrived, their expressions grim as they surveyed the untouched belongings. Every detail deepened the mystery. Who leaves without shoes? Who abandons a motorboat with the keys waiting? Neighbors whispered about cries heard faintly in the early hours. Others swore they had seen strange lantern-like lights hovering over the lake. But none could explain how 7 people disappeared without a struggle, without a trace, without even the splash of water to mark their passing. That morning marked the transformation of a family's gathering into one of the darkest unsolved disappearances in North Carolina's history. By late morning, the lakefront no longer belonged to silence. Patrol cars rolled down the dirt road, their lights flashing across the mist, while deputies stepped out with radios clipped to their shoulders. Sheriff Walter Grayson, a man seasoned by years of small-town investigations, arrived with a stern face that betrayed unease. He had seen accidents on these waters before. Swimmers pulled under by currents, hunters stranded on overturned boats, but nothing like this. 7 cousins gone, belongings untouched, campsite frozen in time. The deputies moved cautiously through the area, photographing each detail, jotting notes, and marking positions of items left behind. A half-burned log in the fire pit, soda bottles with condensation now warm, plates with crumbs still clinging to them. All evidence of a night that had ended normally. Yet nothing showed signs of panic. No overturned chairs, no broken branches, no scattered clothing. It was as though the cousins had risen from their places and simply walked into thin air. Families stood nearby, desperate for answers. Mothers pleaded with the sheriff, voices trembling. "Please, you have to find them. They wouldn't just leave us like this." Fathers paced along the dock, scanning the water with binoculars, refusing to believe their children could be gone. Sheriff Grayson ordered boats onto the lake, deputies rowing carefully across the surface, dragging long poles through reeds and shallow spots. Nothing surfaced. The first theory was drowning. 7 cousins, perhaps intoxicated or reckless, might have entered the water together. But Grayson shook his head. "Not all at once," he muttered, "and not without leaving a trace." He examined the canoe drifting near the shore. Its oars were still in place, untouched. The motorboat, too, was tied neatly with keys in the ignition. "If they went out, they didn't take these," he told his men. Reporters began to arrive by mid-afternoon, snapping photographs of deputies in uniform against the backdrop of a haunted campsite. Sheriff Grayson tightened the perimeter, but the rumors had already started. Families begged for caution, but whispers spread faster than official statements. For investigators, one fact was undeniable. 7 lives had vanished, and every conventional explanation collapsed under the weight of evidence left behind. By the second day, the lakefront had transformed into a command center. Yellow tape stretched across the campground, radios buzzed with constant chatter, and volunteers poured in from nearby towns to help with the search. Boats skimmed the surface of the lake, some dragging sonar equipment, others carrying deputies who leaned over the sides with long poles, testing depths for anything unusual. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors slicing the humid air as divers slipped into the water below, bubbles rising and vanishing in moments. Search dogs were brought in, their handlers urging them along the muddy shoreline. The animals sniffed at shoes, shirts, and personal items recovered from the tents. At first, they barked wildly toward the water, pulling at leashes with urgency. But soon, their trail broke off into nothing, leaving handlers shaking their heads. "They were here," one whispered, "but the scent just ends." It was a chilling statement that spread quickly through the crowd. The families of the missing cousins stood close by, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. Mothers clutched rosaries, fathers stared blankly at the lake, and siblings begged deputies for answers no one could provide. Every hour without discovery tightened the knot of dread. Meanwhile, the media had arrived in full force. News vans lined the roads, reporters delivered live updates in front of flashing cameras, and headlines screamed across television statewide. 7 cousins vanish without a trace. Photographs of the young men and women, smiling, vibrant, alive, were plastered across screens and newspapers, each image a haunting reminder of what was missing. With publicity came speculation. Some locals insisted the lake was cursed, pointing to old stories of people pulled under by unseen forces. Others whispered of cult activity in the woods, dark rituals carried out beneath the cover of night. Still others suggested a more human explanation, a predator lurking nearby, watching from the trees. The sheriff tried to tamp down rumors, but fear was a fire impossible to smother once lit. National outlets soon picked up the story, comparing it to other famous disappearances. The campsite became crowded not just with investigators, but with curious onlookers, conspiracy seekers, and amateur sleuths hoping to solve the riddle themselves. Families begged for privacy, but cameras rolled relentlessly. Through it all, Sheriff Grayson held nightly briefings, his tone clipped but controlled. "We are pursuing every lead. We will not stop until these young people are found." His words carried authority, yet even he could not disguise the doubt growing in his eyes. Days of intensive searching brought no bodies, no signs of struggle, no explanation. The lake, wide and calm, gave back nothing. And as the sun set on yet another fruitless day, one truth grew darker in every heart present. This was no ordinary accident. Something more sinister was hiding in the shadows of North Carolina's waters. The first break came on the 4th day of searching. A volunteer combing a trail near the lake spotted fabric tangled in a thorn bush. Deputies hurried over, carefully cutting the scrap free. It was a piece of plaid cloth, torn and dirt-stained, eerily similar to the shirt one cousin had been wearing in photographs taken that weekend. Families gasped when they saw it, clinging to the hope that it meant survival, but investigators felt the opposite, a sign of struggle hidden within the trees. Later that same afternoon, a deputy patrolling the dock noticed something dark against the planks. On closer inspection, he saw a faint smear of dried blood near the edge. It wasn't much, but under testing it proved human. Whose it was remained unclear. The dock, once a place of laughter and late-night dares, now felt like a crime scene, its wood holding the faintest whisper of violence. By evening, divers surfaced with another find. A sneaker lodged between rocks at the bottom of the shallow cove. Mud clung to the sole, but it was unmistakably a youth's shoe, the laces still tied. A father of one of the cousins confirmed it instantly. "That's hers," he said with a voice cracking under grief. The discovery deepened the mystery. If she had drowned, where was the body? If she hadn't, how had only her shoe ended up below? The following morning, searchers widened their sweep and stumbled upon a chilling sight just half a mile away. The shell of an abandoned lakeside motel. Inside one crumbling room, faint graffiti covered the walls. Among the crude drawings and symbols was a single name scrawled in red. One of the cousins. Investigators debated whether it was an old prank or something far darker. The family saw it as proof that someone had lured the group away from the campsite, into danger. Each clue twisted the story further. The torn shirt suggested a chase. The bloodstain implied violence. The sneaker hinted at separation. The graffiti whispered of ritual or deliberate targeting. None provided answers, but together they painted a grim picture of a night spiraling out of control. Sheriff Grayson stood before reporters that evening, holding evidence bags one by one. "We are piecing this together," he insisted. "These items are being tested. We will follow where the facts lead." His words carried determination, but beneath them lay fear. For every clue revealed, more questions emerged. The lake had gone from scenic haven to a labyrinth of horrors, and while families clung to fragments, the investigators knew these were not signs of survival. They were breadcrumbs left behind by whatever force, human or otherwise, had claimed 7 lives. With evidence mounting but answers scarce, investigators turned their focus toward people who might have crossed paths with the cousins. The first name to surface was a drifter known locally as Red Callahan. He had been seen camping near the lake in the weeks before the disappearance, muttering to himself and carrying a hunting knife. Deputies brought him in for questioning, but his answers, though erratic, revealed nothing substantial. He insisted he had moved on before the cousins arrived. No blood, no belongings, no witnesses tied him to the case. Still, his name spread quickly through town gossip, and locals whispered that a dangerous man had surely been involved. Another lead pointed to a neighbor who lived along the shore. He had a reputation for temper outbursts, and when deputies visited, they found him unusually defensive. Rumors flared. Perhaps he had confronted the group over noise. Perhaps an argument spiraled into violence. But again, no evidence surfaced. He owned no boat, and nothing connected him to the blood on the dock or the torn clothing found in the woods. His anger made him suspicious, but suspicion without proof became another dead end. Some even speculated that one of the cousins themselves might have led the group into trouble, a hidden betrayal born of secrets. Investigators considered the theory briefly, but dismissed it as cruel conjecture. Families clung to unity, refusing to let rumor taint their memories. By the end of that week, the suspects' list looked more like a string of shadows than real threats. Each man questioned faded back into obscurity, leaving investigators frustrated. Theories swirled, but the truth remained buried. Red herrings distracted the search, but none brought them closer to the vanished seven. As weeks turned into months, hope dimmed and the case began to stall. The local sheriff's department had exhausted its resources, every trail ending in silence. Families pleaded with state authorities, writing letters demanding fresh eyes. Their persistence paid off when, nearly a year later, the FBI formally reopened the case. For the first time, the disappearance of the seven cousins would be examined not just as a local tragedy, but as a federal mystery. The Bureau arrived with equipment and expertise the small county could not match. Forensic teams studied every item recovered from the site, running advanced DNA tests that had only recently become standard practice. Fibers from the torn shirt were examined under high-powered microscopes. The sneaker retrieved from the cove was swabbed for trace material. Even the faint bloodstain on the dock was retested with chemical processes unavailable to the sheriff's lab in 1997. Each sample was logged, each fragment treated as if it might hold the key to unraveling the case. In addition to physical evidence, the FBI deployed sonar technology across the lake. Submersible scanners mapped the floor in detail, searching for cavities, sunken debris, or hidden graves. The once placid waters now became a grid on computer screens, every dip and ridge translated into lines of data. For weeks, divers revisited promising anomalies, surfacing with muddy debris but little conclusive. The lake kept its secrets well. To strengthen their profile, agents brought in criminal psychologists. They studied the case history, the timeline, and the oddities. 7 people disappearing at once, without theft, without ransom. The profiler concluded that if foul play had occurred, it was deliberate, planned, and carried out by someone who knew both the terrain and the cousins' routines. "This wasn't chaos," one agent remarked. "This was control." Families sat through briefings, torn between relief that the case lived on and despair that answers remained distant. National news returned briefly, running segments on the federal involvement, calling it one of the strangest group vanishings in modern history. Yet despite all the science, all the scans, and all the analysis, the truth stayed hidden. The FBI had widened the lens, but the picture remained painfully incomplete. As weeks turned into months, hope dimmed and the case began to stall. The local sheriff's department had exhausted its resources, every trail ending in silence. Families pleaded with state authorities, writing letters demanding fresh eyes. Their persistence paid off when, nearly a year later, the FBI formally reopened the case. For the first time, the disappearance of the 7 cousins would be examined not just as a local tragedy, but as a federal mystery. The Bureau arrived with equipment and expertise the small county could not match. Forensic teams studied every item recovered from the site, running advanced DNA tests that had only recently become standard practice. Fibers from the torn shirt were examined under high-powered microscopes. The sneaker retrieved from the cove was swabbed for trace material. Even the faint bloodstain on the dock was retested with chemical processes unavailable to the sheriff's lab in 1997. Each sample was logged, each fragment treated as if it might hold the key to unraveling the case. In addition to physical evidence, the FBI deployed sonar technology across the lake. Submersible scanners mapped the floor in detail, searching for cavities, sunken debris, or hidden graves. The once placid waters now became a grid on computer screens, every dip and ridge translated into lines of data. For weeks, divers revisited promising anomalies, surfacing with muddy debris but little conclusive. The lake kept its secrets well. To strengthen their profile, agents brought in criminal psychologists. They studied the case history, the timeline, and the oddities. 7 people disappearing at once, without theft, without ransom. The profiler concluded that if foul play had occurred, it was deliberate, planned, and carried out by someone who knew both the terrain and the cousins' routines. "This wasn't chaos," one agent remarked. "This was control." Families sat through briefings, torn between relief that the case lived on and despair that answers remained distant. National news returned briefly, running segments on the federal involvement, calling it one of the strangest group vanishings in modern history. Yet despite all the science, all the scans, and all the analysis, the truth stayed hidden. The FBI had widened the lens, but the picture remained painfully incomplete. The discovery of the van and the remains brought the case into sharp focus, but it did not erase the shadows surrounding it. The FBI confirmed identities through DNA and returned personal belongings to grieving families. Rings, watches, and faded photographs, objects once carried with pride, were now artifacts of loss. The families gathered for memorials that summer, laying their loved ones to rest after 25 years of unanswered questions. For many, closure came not from justice, but from finally having a place to mourn. Investigators presented their findings at a press conference, careful with every word. They explained that the van had been deliberately submerged, that restraint marks suggested foul play, but that no suspect had yet been conclusively identified. Evidence pointed to planning and knowledge of the lake's terrain, leading agents to believe the perpetrator had lived nearby. But after decades, key witnesses had died, records were incomplete, and leads had gone cold. It was a resolution in fact, but not in accountability. Reporters pressed Sheriff Grayson, now retired but still following the case closely. He spoke with the weariness of a man who had carried a mystery on his shoulders for decades. "We found them," he said simply. "That's what we always promised the families. We found them, but the truth of how and why, maybe that's something only the lake itself knows." For the community, the haunting silence that followed the cousins' disappearance was replaced by a different kind of silence: the weight of knowing. The lake, once a place for summer joy, became a memorial in its own right. People left flowers at the dock. Families stood in quiet reflection where laughter had once echoed. The water looked the same, calm and shimmering, but to those who remembered, its depths were forever changed. Nationally, the story became a grim reminder of time's double edge. 25 years had concealed evidence, but also preserved it long enough for modern technology to bring answers. Commentators called it one of the most chilling cold cases solved by persistence and science. Yet despite all the breakthroughs, a lingering sense of incompleteness hung over every conclusion. The legend of the lake lives on, not as folklore of curses or ghosts, but as a real tragedy carved into the history of North Carolina. 7 cousins, united by blood and laughter, became forever linked to the dark waters that hid them. And while their families now hold graves to visit and names etched in stone, the mystery of motive remains unresolved. For those who seek out stories of the unexplained, the tale of the North Carolina lake is more than history. It is a reminder that not every silence offers peace, and not every answer brings comfort. If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. This is Untold Secrets Daily, where forgotten mysteries are brought back into the light. The disappearance of the 7 cousins reminds us that beneath calm waters can lie the darkest of truths. For 25 years, their families carried pain without answers, until the FBI's chilling discovery revealed what the lake had hidden all along. Yet questions remain, questions that may never be answered. That is the nature of untold secrets. If stories like this leave you questioning what lies in the shadows of history, then join us. Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. This is Untold Secrets Daily, where the silence of the past is never allowed to rest forever.